And today I'm together with my colleague Bartek, and I'll let him introduce himself.
Yeah, thanks, Alexandra. I'm Bartek. On daily basis, I'm working as a cloud solution architect with the global and enterprise accounts. But for last 4 months, I have been working with SQLMI team as a program manager, so supporting the SQLMI team in any kind of work around SQLMI. And I was also ability to cooperate with Alexandra and her team in scope of migration and migration tools. So that's why we have a session today together, and we will go through the migration process or modernization of your SQL to Azure SQL.
Definitely the migration process is not something that can be covered in just 1 hour. And it's a more complex topic. So what we were planning to cover today is mainly related to the new things we are launching in the Azure SQL migration space. But before going through these new things that we are planning to develop to streamline and accelerate these migrations, we are going to walk you through whatever tools and services we currently have on the market. And with the good and the ugly for each and every tool. I would say after that, we're going to switch also to what's new in Azure SQL migration. And this is where we are trying to cover the migration principle for Azure, for ADS, and what we have done in Azure space in order to make sure we'll have successful migrations. There's also a demo that's going to walk you through this private preview. So it's not yet public, and it's also, we are thinking of the things that we are developing and how we can address those things. So when I talk about SQL migrations, this may seem a no-brainer. Whenever we think about SQL to SQL, it sort of comes naturally, or people think, oh, it should be like the same thing that we do on-prem when we upgrade from one version to the other. In reality, there are a lot of challenges. And in order to detail and share those challenges, we would need to look at different perspectives. Who are we talking to? Are we talking with the decision maker, or are we talking with the line of business owner or with the DBA? Because we may need to fulfill different requirements depending on the audience. Working with customers, both me and Bartek have been working with customers at EMEA and even beyond EMEA borders. And we've sort of like tried to put these challenges into categories. If we talk about the decision makers, they are not really interested in the tools, the feature of the tools, concurrent migration threads. They are more interested in the total cost of ownership, the return of investment. Is there any downtime during the migration phase? How many resources, how much time, and how much money do I need to put in this migration? And although we always talk about Azure SQL as a native target for our migrations, behind the scenes, there's a little bit of planning that also needs to happen. If we switch a little bit the perspective, and we are moving towards the line of business application or to the DBA. Now, the conversation becomes a little bit more technical. We have a lot of tools on the market. What is the tool of choice? What is the process? Should I use DMA? Should I use DMS? Should I use DA? What is DA? What is SSMA? And this is just on the tool side. Then there's a different conversation on the target. Where should I go? Should I go to Azure SQL DB? Should I go to SQLMI? Should I go to a hyperscale? Should I go to SQL in a VM? What is the right target for me? Moreover, what is the right size for me. And that can be really painful because the choice of target and the size of that target has a direct impact in the total cost of ownership and return of investment conversation that you will have with the decision maker. And we recognize that's not a simple step. So the migration is, as I said, it's not simple.
As Alexandra mentioned, yes, there was some freeze. And as you mentioned, the migration process and all the aspects of the migrations depends on who we are talking with. And no matter if we are talking with the business guys or the technical guys, we need to consider that the migration is let's say planning needs to be planned and executed correctly. And in fact, every single migration project is an element of, let's say, 4 common phases. We are talking about the discovery and assessment. It depends on terminology, but we see that in assessment phase, there is also a part of discovery. So discovery of all the databases, all the elements which need to be migrated. And this is, let's say, from the discovery point of view, it's more like technical discovery of what we have. But from the assessment, it's more like having all elements in one place. So all the aspects of the technical possibilities of migration, but at the same time, all the operational elements like licensing, costs, TCO, and return of investment. So at the level of assessment, we are in fact preparing all necessary steps to be able to successfully migrate our SQL or database environments to Azure. And in fact, as I see it from a customer perspective and customer experience, it's the most challenging phase, because in this phase we are challenging we have challenging elements like, we need to discover what's currently implemented, and it's not so easy to document everything and recognize what's currently being used in on-prem environments. And in fact, at this level, at this phase, we are getting more and more information, and sometimes our customers are even a little bit surprised when it comes to outcomes from such assessment. But believe me, this is one of the most important steps. And if you want to perform the migration smoothly, just invest your time in assessment and perform this assessment in a very detailed way. So once the assessment is done, we are going into migration phase. And in the migration phase, it's an element of physical migration, but to be able to physically migrate our environment, we need to get outcomes from the assessment and prepare for this migration. And it's also worth to mention that during the assessment phase, we have a lot of additional tools which can support us in this assessment. And Alexandra will explain you a little bit more about the tools which are available as she is working with the tools on daily basis. But on every single phase, starting from assessment through the migrate, we have the support from tools perspective. And as Alexandra mentioned, maybe it's not so important for business decision makers to have these tools in place, but from the technical point of view, having the right tools which will support the migration process is one of the most important elements. So today we will also show you part of such migration, which will be done with one of the latest tools produced. But just have in mind that the migrate process is heavily supported by different kind of tools, starting from Azure Migrate and ending on the newest migration experience available in Data Studio, which was also introduced, I believe, during the keynote. So once we have the assessment and migration, let's say, done, there is two more phases which need to be performed, and we need to focus on them. Because I always, not always, but in many, very often hear from the customers that after migration we have some challenges in scope of performance, in scope of reliability of the solution. So there is an optimization phase, and definitely you need to focus on this optimization part just after the migration. So monitor carefully your solution. Just implement any kind of monitoring solution which can help you to determine and set the baseline of your environment. And then based on this, try to optimize everything what's going on your SQLDB or SQL Managed Instance based on real input. So this phase is also very important just to have a good experience after the migration, because the migration process is not ending after the database is available in Azure or in any kind of cloud. It's ending once every single application and every single user is satisfied with the outcomes after the migration. So optimization definitely is something you need to focus after you physically have your database in the cloud. And of course, secure and manage. It's quite important that, of course, platform as a service solutions gives you the manageability from the cloud provider. So in this case, for example, Microsoft provides you all the elements of backup for SQLDB or for SQL Managed Instance, or even for the VM if it's configured correctly. But have in mind that after the migration, there are still elements which need to be managed by you. So including these elements of monitoring to have a good optimization experience and to be able to perform the optimization correctly, and also monitor all the security aspects like connectivity, all the external, let's say, attempts to connect or use of your service. So just focus also on the monitoring of the security of your solution to make sure all the aspects of security are met, especially that we are talking about the database which will be running in the cloud. So security is a very important element, also from the application perspective and ability to connect to your database.
Thank you very much, Bartek. And those are the stages which really need to happen and have to be implemented. Now, how can we achieve or automate each of these stages? So what do we have there on the market? For discovery and assessment, I'm not sure how many of you have seen the Azure Migrate Hub. So the Azure Migrate Hub has been, and that's something that we've also worked a lot lately, is providing a discovery for SQL Server on VMware, and also doing an assessment and generating some SKU recommendations. The assessment rule set that we have implemented in Azure Migrate is basically cleaned and triaged, more simplified rule set of DMA. So we looked at all the rule sets that we've had implemented before in DMA and try to get the ones which are really relevant and have them in more relevant categories. So like migration blockers or warnings and things that you need to look at because they are changing the behavior. And the data that is collected by Azure Migrate using the appliance is also processed by this rule set, generating the compatibility with Azure SQLDB or SQL MI. But on top of that, we also do SKU recommendations. And we can also collect data from the DNVs, performance data from DNVs, to have an overview of the memory consumption, CPU, IOPS, latency, at DB level. And that information is fed into the SKU recommendation, and we try to find the cheapest tier that is going to fit your workload from the performance perspective. So that's going to fit from a memory, a CPU, and IO perspective as well. In terms of what we are looking next, and that's going a little bit on the what's coming part, we also want to expand the discovery part to be able to do cluster discovery, SQL cluster discovery, and we also want to be able to maybe in the future discover standalone machines which are not on VMware, so basically physical environments. And that's something that we are looking at. It's not yet implemented. Another option for assessment and migration phase, it's an on-prem tool. It's probably something that you are all familiar. It's called Database Migration Assistant. It doesn't do so much on the discovery phase because you will need to provide yourself the connection string, basically the name of the servers that you want to connect. And it's going to connect those sources, load the metadata information that we need in order to run the assessment rules, and then generate some warnings. Now, if we look at the capabilities of DMA, you will see that we had two test cases: the SQL Server feature parity and compatibility issue, and this was pretty confusing for the users because it wasn't very clear. And I just switched to the next slide to give you an overview of that interface. Now, back to this slide, DMA is something that we recommend still and something that is easy to use, but we are looking at enhancing that experience. And with ADS, we are already showing you what's our next step. Another tool that we are using to access the data layer this time is Data Access Migration Tool. It is actually a Visual Studio Code extension that you need to install, and we are able to analyze different type of files using two dialects currently: T-SQL dialect and PLSQL. So we are also able to look at Oracle, Java applications, and identify PLSQL code. But in the same time, we are able to analyze XML files, CSV files, C# files, to be able to identify potential queries and also connection strings that you would need to update. So DMT can give you two things: identify connection strings that you would need to update on your application side, and the second thing is identify ad hoc TSQL code coming from within your application code. And then the output of DMT, this sort of queries, potential queries, is basically fed into DMA. And we can analyze the syntax of those queries and see if there are any issues running those queries in Azure SQL DB. Another tool that has been there for a while, and we've just invested in it recently, is the Database Experimentation Assistant. The Database Experimentation Assistant allows you to replay a production workload against your Azure targets. And your Azure target can be, or SQL on-prem as well, Azure SQL DB or SQL MI, or you can also run it against SQL on-prem. What we've done, we've sort of done a lot of optimization and changes to make sure that when you are targeting an Azure SQL object, we streamline that experience. So you can use extended events, and you can replay those extended events and have a report at the end about the performance of your queries, even before cutting off the application. So it's really a sort of performance preview with a report stating what queries were faster, what queries were slower, what queries had issues and exception during this simulation. And you don't need to redirect your application at any point in time. DA captures the workload on your production system and replays it against the target. Another tool that you might have heard of or not is called SQL Server Migration Assistant. It is one of the tools that we use for heterogeneous sources to convert different database platform to Azure SQL or SQL Server on-prem. We support it. The Migration Assistant is actually a suite of 5 tools supporting sources as Oracle, DB2, Sybase, MySQL, and Access to SQL on-prem starting 2012 until 2019, Azure SQL DB, SQL Managed Instance, and also for Oracle to SQL, we support SQLDW, that's the old name. Now it's called Synapse SQL Pool. Another service that may sound familiar in this context is related to the Azure Database Migration Services. And we sort of initially architected the service to do the data transfer, and it has expanded in the future to many sources. And I know we've recently discontinued the support for online migration, and there is a good reason for that. And we are planning to work on that experience in the future. So I'm going to share a little bit more details later on. Now, I'm just going to quickly go through the capabilities and gaps. DMA, it's pretty popular. It's simple to use. But in terms of rules that we are looking at cleaning them up and align them with whatever we have right now in Azure Migrate. That is not going to be instant, and it's going to get a little bit, it's going to get us a little bit of time, like a few weeks. The rule sets that we check for assessment are documented for both Azure SQL DB and SQL MI, so you can consult those that documentation when using Azure Migrate. And the plan is in the future to have the same rules also brought back to DMA. In terms of assessment results, sometimes it was creating some confusion as we had different test cases with different prerequisites in terms of permissions. And the way we were surfacing the results was not always easy to understand. What's breaking changes, what behavior changes, what's deprecated feature, what's information, what are the migration blockers. So sometimes it was really difficult to navigate from a presentation perspective through all of these. In terms of data movement, DMA doesn't support SQL MI for the data movement, but it does support SQL MI as a target for assessments. And you can also use DMA for assessments from SQL RDS on Amazon. So if you have SQL RDS on AWS, you can use DMA to check the compatibility with our targets. I'm just going to quickly go through DMS and the capabilities and gaps. And I think we didn't do a good job in retiring the online migration for DMS. It was a little bit on fast forward, and where there weren't so many easy options out there. So the alternatives was to use replication. And for managed instance, Bartek is going to walk you through the log shipping API and functionality. But it wasn't easy, and we acknowledge that for the customers using it. The gaps, they were pretty big, and one of them were also related to inability to mitigate migration workflow issues that we have. And that was basically tied to the architecture, to the control plane, to the architecture limitation of the service. And that was not something that we could easily fix. There were other requirements as express route or site-to-site VPN. Then we had some conversation regarding the ports that need to be open both for inbound and outbound. And we didn't support any online migrations to Azure VM. So those were the main things that we've taken in consideration when we've tried to build the new migration experience. And that would bring us to the new things that we've done. And with all of these things, we try to put it in the migration principles that Bartek is going to walk you through.
Yeah, exactly. That's the place where I wanted to jump in and comment a little bit what Alexandra already said. As you see, we were aware of some gaps in the products, and we also wanted to let's say put it as a migration principles to make the migration process easy for anyone. And we want to look at this at the data center level or at the line of business applications level. Whatever you want to do, the migration process should be easy and available for almost everyone. We want to build the technology which will be used by the ADS migration, which I will be showing, and also leverage on the scale for the Azure Migrate itself as a solution. And we want to make a consistent assessment engine for both Azure Migrate and ADS, and that's the reason of let's say good, huge investment and working very deeply on the migration process. And right now we are introducing the ADS limited preview migration experience, and I believe Bob mentioned during his keynote about this let's say easy to click migration from the Azure Data Studio, and that's exactly what we want to show you today as a part of demo during this presentation. But before we will go into presentation, as Alexandra mentioned, we are working on making this migration process fully, let's say, consistent as an end-to-end process. So including all the elements of, let's say, assessment, recommendation of SKU, performing the migration, so the migration itself, but also giving users possibility to start this migration from well-known tools like, for example, Azure Data Studio. So today we will show you how the Azure migration from ADS looks like and how it works. But just before jumping into the demo, just short introduction to architecture, how it works, how it's built, and how we should set up it if you want to use the ADS migration experience. So first of all, it's a matter of having, of course, on-prem SQL Server or SQL Server running on virtual machine in any let's say environment. It's up to you if you will be migrating the on-prem solution or you will be just migrating the VM running on third-party cloud provider or hoster who is giving you the VM with the SQL Server. So first of all, we have this source database. Then we have a target instance, let's say, and we have possibility to perform the migration to SQL Server on Azure VM or SQL Managed Instance. So it's a possibility to set up this, and what's very important, we need to set up this in advance. So we have to have the empty or ready for migration target and point this as a target location for our migrate process. And the third element is to have the file share, which will be available for our self-hosted integration runtime service, which will be getting our backups from your on-prem or your virtual machine, and will be copying these backups directly to Azure Storage. So in this case, we are talking about the local share for our backups files, and I will be showing this during the demo. And at the same time, we need to configure, but it will be done, let's say, in the background for us, the DMS service, so the migration service, which will be performing all the migration. The DMS will be using the self-hosted integration runtime. So the integration runtime is well known from services like Azure Data Factory, and it's being used to connect from the Azure environment directly to your on-prem environment or environment on the third-party cloud provider, but without any additional configuration of VPNs or express routes. So it's just a matter of installing the self-hosted integration runtime. It's an application which can be installed on the Windows running virtual machine, for example. And based on this, self-hosted integration runtime will be used as a connection to our environment and to perform the copy of our backup files. And of course, to be able to perform all these migration steps and just to start the migration, and I suppose it's a matter of let's say having in place also the Data Studio installed, where we have the extension for migration, so Azure SQL migration extension for Data Studio. And that's pretty much all. I mentioned also about the Azure Storage account, which will be used for our backups hold before they will be applied to our virtual machine or to our managed instance. So as you see, 9 steps, 9 activities. A part of them needs to be done manually by us, like preparing the share for our files, or preparing the data studio and installing the extension, and also self-hosted integration runtime. But a lot of work will be done in background, and you will see this during our demo. So let me switch to the demo just to be able to show it to you. I hope it will start. Having experience from previous session, I just uploaded the video of the presentation. So we have here the local SQL Server, and we have databases running on this SQL Server. This is well-known NordVit database with some tables inside the database, and we will be migrating this particular database. As you see, we have for this database recovery model set to full because we will be using the full backups and also the transaction log backups to perform online operation. So in this case, we need to perform the backup of our database. Of course, I'm doing this manually, but it's a matter of preparing the automation scripts for doing such migration, such backups. And in this case, we are starting from full backup, and it will be done to local disk, as you see. But this local disk, in my case, is also the share which will be used to hold the backups and give access to these backups for integration runtime. So I'm going to perform the backup here to the location. Of course, you can put also the share location here. It doesn't matter. In my case, it's the same machine, so that's why I'm using the local directory, but I could also use the share location. And here we have backup of the log and 2 more backup log statements which will be used later during the migration process. So now we can start the migration process directly from the Data Studio. And here we have, thanks to this extension, we have this Azure SQL migration option here. And as you see, we can start the migration process by providing some necessary information. So I will log into my account and my subscription in my Azure AD tenant. Then I need to provide information how I will connect to the local instance of the server, so the SQL Server. In my case, this is a local instance, so I'm putting just a dot as a local host, giving the username and password, which will allow us to access to the instance. And here we have information about the SQL targets. So we can choose the managed instance or the virtual machine. We are going to migrate to managed instance. And here we have databases which can be migrated, and they are already pre-assessment. There was a pre-assessment that they are ready for migration. So no issues found, and we are ready to start the migration process. To be able to do this, we need to choose our subscription. So I'm choosing the subscription where I already have my managed instance set up. For the preview, we have the East US because this is supported region for the migration, but this is only the preview experience. And we are choosing the resource group in which we have our SQL database managed instance. I already have this, and this is something we need to do earlier. So we need to deploy the managed instance earlier just to be able to choose it here. Here we have online migration or offline migration experience. We are talking about the online. This feature of offline is coming soon, but we will be doing the online migration option here right now. So choosing the online migration and then providing some more information about where my backups are stored. So here on the network share, and I'm copying the network share location to the wizard, and providing the Windows account name which can be used to access to this share. As I mentioned, right now I'm doing this on the local machine, so I have everything locally available, so it's not a problem to use the local account, but in normal situation you will probably use the Windows AD account to access the file share. So here we have a password for the shared location, and then we have details of the storage account, which will be used to copy the data files from our on-prem environment. So once again, we are choosing the right resource group. In my case, we have everything in the same resource group, so it's a little bit easier. We have resource group dedicated for migration, so we are choosing this once again here. Yes, this is the right one. And storage account, which I also created before. So the storage account was created on the Azure side. And here we have name of the database for the migration. So after the migration, we will see the database on the managed instance in the following name. So right now we are setting the Azure Database Migration Service. As mentioned, we will be using this data DMS orchestration as an orchestration process. And if we do not have DMS in place, it will be created for us. In my case, I didn't have this DMS in place, so it will be created, and then it will be used for this migration. And here we have option to create, as mentioned, but we can choose also the existing one. And what we are getting also the authentication keys, which need to be used for the self-integration runtime, self-hosted integration runtime. I have this self-hosted integration runtime already installed because it takes a few minutes to download and install it. But during the installation, you will be asked to provide this key, which was generated here during the wizard. So this is the summary of what we already provided, and then we can start this configuration experience, let's say. And start migration for the database. We can go to the Azure SQL migration just to see what's going on right now, and we will get some more information about the status of our migration. So as you see, I already completed one migration before this one, and this one is in progress. So that's why part of the elements were already set up in our demo, like the integration runtime or the DMS service. But here we see the migration process, which is in progress right now, and migration status is creating, which means the necessary elements are being created, like the folders on our storage account, like DMS if it wasn't available before, and all the elements of configuration just to start the migration process. So while it's being configured, we can switch to our Azure portal and see the location of the storage which we provided. And as you see, here we have the storage account, and on the storage account there are few containers, and we are mostly interested in these GUID name containers. As you see, we already have two of them. The first one was created during first migration, and the second one is right now being created by our migration process. And for now, this folder is empty, and this container is empty. And to this container, we'll be copying the backup files from our on-prem environment. So let's refresh it. And we will get information that this is in progress, so we can go to details of the migration process and see what's going on. So all information are available here. So we have source database or source server, target database, target server, migration status in progress, and information about full backup files and lock which were recently applied. So we can switch a little bit to the migration status. I see the information from the chat that video is not going so fast. So maybe I will slow down a little bit just to wait. Yeah, but in fact, it's still a matter of waiting for, let's say, this progress of the migration. So let's refresh it, and you will see right now that after this refresh, we will have information that our log files are being applied on our managed instance. So once again, going into database migration details. And here we probably will see in a few seconds the progress of the migration. So let's wait a little bit for. Okay, I see that Mariusz is typing that we are on the page of database options, which is very, very early stage. So I believe right now we are at the, let's say, 5 minutes of 10, where we have already the migration set up, and we have the information that our database was being restored on the managed instance, and it's being in the restoring stage, which means that we are able to apply another log files. That's why this is the moment when, where of course our automation of the log files backup can work, but we can easily perform additional backup from our side just to see if these backup files are being used. So right now you see we have database restored, log file has arrived, and it's being prepared for restoring.
Then I think we've lost Bartek, but I will go through the getting started in private preview. So in order for you, how can you get on board on this experience, which is the private preview? So we have some documentation available at https://aka.ms -SQL migration that you can look at. And you need to install the latest version of Azure Data Studio Insiders. You need to install the Azure SQL migration extension from the extension marketplace, and then just go through the steps that Bartek described. What's coming next? So what's coming next also in ADS? What we are looking at is basically enhance the experience with integrated SKU recommendation also in the future. We have publicly documented the MI and DB rules in the Microsoft Docs, so you can have a look at that. These are the assessment rules that we use both for Azure SQL Migrate as well as ADS. And in the following weeks, we are going to make them in line with whatever we have in DMA. The assessment agent is based on the T-SQL script DOM parser. It is sort of the same as DMA. And in order to move the data behind the scenes, DMA is not using the old architecture, but it's using basically an ADF pipeline. So you can find all that information on the portal, on the site for the private preview. And also, please feel free to reach out to us for any questions that you might have or any feedback that you might have on this migration experience. Looking for the future, what's coming in Azure SQL migration? Well, the principle that we have in mind is having a unified migration experience and capability. So what we want to do, we want to complete the migration scenario for Azure SQL. So we are looking at doing VM migrations as well as Azure SQL DB migration, not just migrations to SQL MI. For the Azure Migrate space, we are also looking at covering physical servers and being able to discover clustered instances, as well as availability groups and all the information that comes within these high availability scenarios. The steps that we are looking at is discovery, assessment, migration. And probably it's not going to be something that we will lock down in 2 or 3 weeks. So it's probably going to take a few development cycles. In DMA, in the near future, we are looking at cleaning up the root set, as I said, and also replacing the current SKU recommendation algorithm with a better with a better algorithm that is going to also explain the choice. So whenever we are recommending a target, we'll have a detailed explanation regarding the memory consumption that we've collected, the IOPS, the latency, or the size of the database, basically all of them being dimensions that drove us to recommend you a certain target. In terms of heterogeneous spaces, we are looking at streamlining the Oracle to SQL experience. We already have some features in SSMA. We just released SSMA 8.19, where you have the cluster functionality enabled. And we are also looking at adding an assessment piece for Oracle to Azure SQL migration. Another component that is under our radar, and we are planning to do some work in the future, but we have not started yet, is regarding the total cost of ownership. And that's not something simple to build, but we are looking at sort of enhancing while creating this experience for the future. I tried to resume as much as I could what's coming in Azure SQL migration and what we are looking at achieving on different products. I do hope you find this information interesting and useful and definitely new. And we are looking forward to your questions and feedback, and we welcome any comments as well. Are there any questions, any comments, feedback? What do you think about this experience? Do you think it's going to be useful? Do you think it's something that you can leverage?
Just raise your hand and then probably we can unmute you, or you can unmute yourself just to make a comment. Alexandra, we have a question in the chat. How about migrate file stream data?
So yes, that is... Oh, sorry, I just muted myself. So about file stream data, that is a rule set that we are currently working on. Depending on the target that you are looking for, we don't really have that right now. So you can remove the file stream information before doing the migration. But we are looking at cleaning the rule set and raising that as well.
Okay, guys. So if there are any more questions, we are open to address them. If not, thank you very much for your presence here and attending this session. Thank you, Alexandra, for being here with us. Thank you for the session, and have a great rest of the conference.
Thank you very much, guys. Thank you very much, Bartek. This is definitely an amazing experience, especially in Avatar Land. It's new for me, and I definitely like it. Glad to actually see you here, and wish you a great day and have fun with all the new information and sessions at this conference. Thank you.
Thank you.